We promised a session on avoiding burnout as a nonprofit employee, and I am delighted to introduce you all to our guest speaker, Rachel Lyons. She is finishing her master's in clinical mental health psychology this May and is currently interning as a therapist at 2 different psychotherapy clinics to earn her advanced degree at Richmond. Today, she's going to be sharing some of the research, tools, and techniques used to help workers in the nonprofit field both heal from and prevent burnout and compassion fatigue. With that, I'd love to hand it over to Rachel Lyons.
Wow, thank you so much. That was like the most professional introduction I've ever had. So thank you guys so much for having me. I am Rachel Lyons, and you will notice I have the same last name as a few of these other people. I am married to Jake. And yes, I'm a clinical mental health counseling intern, finishing up in May. So we're just going to talk about avoiding compassion fatigue and burnout today and some things that you can do to prevent that, just as Marty said. So you can go ahead to the next slide. So what are compassion fatigue and burnout? I'm just curious if you guys want to do a thumbs up on your little reactions down there at the bottom if you've ever heard of burnout. Yeah, so looks like a lot of us have heard of burnout. How many of you have heard of compassion fatigue though? So it looks like some of us, not all of us. So we're going to be talking about the difference between compassion fatigue and burnout, and how it's caused. So compassion fatigue is emotional and physical exhaustion resulting in the decreased ability to empathize or feel compassion for others. Compassion fatigue is a precursor to burnout. So we start to notice some of the signs and symptoms of compassion fatigue. And when that happens, then we can be wary, okay, I could potentially be close to burnout. And these reactions are caused by high stress, and they put us into our fight, flight, or freeze. And so these are things that we want to be able to avoid, especially in the workplace as caring people. And so you can go to the next slide. And so I wanted to talk about some risk factors of compassion fatigue. So anyone who cares deeply for others, and hopefully that's everyone here, I'm sure it is. People who are highly empathetic are more at risk than those who are not. People who are highly dedicated providers in highly demanding positions, and people who have low self-compassion are more at risk. And so with that just means that those who really pride themselves in being extremely selfless and neglect their own self-care and their own self-compassion are more at risk of having compassion fatigue. And we'll talk a lot more about that. So those who are in unsupportive workplaces and have weak support systems. So that's just people who are not engaging in social activities. Maybe your family is not super supportive. Maybe your boss isn't super supportive. I'm sure all of you have great bosses though. And so also being mindful of our physical and mental illnesses, those can also, if we're physically and mentally not feeling great, that can increase our risk of compassion fatigue. And then also experiencing personal grief or trauma, especially in a lot of the fields that you guys are in with hospices and hospitals, you're hearing and probably experiencing a lot of really difficult stories and difficult things on a daily basis. Even if it's not happening directly to you or a family member, you're still experiencing those things, and it can really take a toll. And then people who are at younger age and have less job experience in the field are also more at risk of compassion fatigue. So I know all of that is sounds very doom and gloom, like, oh no, like I went over this with Jake last night and he was like, I have a lot of these. But don't worry, it's going to be okay. We will talk about ways to like prevent these things, and kind of combat those risk factors. And so some of the signs and symptoms are sleep disturbance. So people who suffer from hypersomnia, which is like wanting to sleep all the time, or insomnia, which is like having trouble sleeping. People who are experiencing an increase in their avoidant behavior. So they're just like desiring to retreat. They want to like be alone, like avoiding having those tough conversations that they might need to have, things like that. An increase in anxiety or depression is also a sign and symptom of compassion fatigue. And then, like we talked about in the beginning, where this is a stress response that can trigger our fight, flight, or freeze response from stress, that startle response can also be a clue to us of like, oh, I'm startling a little bit easier, or I'm like experiencing some hypervigilance. Also having an increase in anger or irritability, increase in tearfulness, that feeling of hopelessness or helplessness, and then also experiencing intrusive thoughts or memories, especially if they're associated with, like we talked about before, some of those like really difficult stories that you're having to hear and deal with on a daily basis. And just having a lot of those things like constantly staying in your mind. And then also experiencing poor concentration, the inability to perform work tasks, and a loss of humor. These are all just things to look out for. And like if you're noticing some of these, definitely be paying close attention to some things that you can do to kind of like help dampen that down a little bit. So again, compassion fatigue can turn into burnout. And so what burnout actually looks like, it's a little bit different. Once burnout happens, most people will never go back to that job. So that very cheery news that Jared gave us in the beginning of like a lot of people are kind of like dropping out. There's a big turnover rate. Once burnout happens, it takes about 7 years to recover. A lot of people often say like, oh, I'm so burnt out, when what they're actually talking about is compassion fatigue, because again, like burnout is not something you like go on vacation and recover from. It takes a very long time. And it is described as a total lack of empathy. So like you just stop caring, like you stop caring about the job that you're in, you stop caring about the people around you. And it can just like make you numb. And so it is just total exhaustion mixed with anxiety and depression. Also a negative self-esteem, poor attitude, reduced efficiency and effectiveness. So burnout is really serious. So once you start noticing some of those signs of compassion fatigue, you want to make sure to be mindful and aware of those things so that it doesn't potentially turn into burnout. Because at that point, it's like very difficult to come back from. So let's see. There we go. So I like to think of this as self-care is actually like an ethical obligation, especially for people who, again, like are very selfless, really pride themselves on being selfless. If we can make this sound like, you know, this is actually something I'm doing for others. And if I don't have anything in me to give, then I can't give to others. I'm not going to be effective at my job. And so neglecting self-care in the helping professions and in nonprofits, it is an ethical violation. That's really strong wording, but I truly believe that having strong ethics is strong self-care. Because if we're lacking compassion and empathy, just think about like what is taking its place. And so compassion fatigue and burnout are linked to ethical errors. And so it's just really important to be mindful of these things and to be mindful of our like mental and emotional state. You can go to the next one. Okay, so now we're going to get into some of the prevention. So this is like, okay, you're telling me all of this stuff. It sounds really serious. It sounds like something I don't want. And maybe some of you are like, I am experiencing some of these symptoms. So like, what can I do? And so really an increase in self-care practices is going to go such a long way. And to be able to do that, again, you have to have that self-awareness of being like, oh yeah, I'm noticing like I'm a lot more irritable lately. I'm gonna like do some things for myself to kind of combat that. And so positive coping strategies, and we'll talk some more about like lots of different things and examples that we can do. Spiritual practices, exercise, leisure time, to just name a couple. And then really like leaning on that social support system. And something else that I think can be really helpful in preventing compassion fatigue and burnout, or in like kind of coming out of that, is remembering your why. Like, what made you get into this job in the first place? What excited you about being in this position? What, as a caring and compassionate person, do you feel like, how do you feel like you're making a difference? And if anyone like has anything that they want to share with that, I would love to hear that if you'd like to unmute yourself.
Hi, Rachel. Hey, it's Jeannie out here in Fresno. How are you?
Good.
So I am looking at this and reading through, not the burnout, but the compassion. What did you call it again?
Compassion fatigue.
Yes. Definitely had that earlier this year.
Yeah.
And just reflecting back on that, I realized like it wasn't all of those symptoms, but definitely a lot of them, like couldn't sleep, things like that. And I think a lot of what got me through it was simply like a change in attitude, like a, very thoughtful, just looking back on like, why am I here? What am I doing here? And why did I love this job? And now all of a sudden, I can't stay on this job. There's, so I think this is a really important topic for all of us in fundraising. It's really stressful. And I think most of us are here because we really care about what we do. So I really appreciate you being here to talk about this, and just to, let us stop and think about it and recognize what's going on, with ourselves, because we get so busy, we come last, you put everybody else first.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think that's so true. And especially like people who get into nonprofit work, like tend to be just like some of the most compassionate, giving people. And so it is really, really important to like stop and make sure that you're taking care of yourself as well. I'll give another like couple of seconds to see if anyone else wanted to share anything before moving on to the next slide.
Hey, Rachel, this is Ron. I've been in this business for over 40 years, and I've been associated with several major institutions, mostly in a major leadership role. One of the things that's so important in remembering the why is creating a culture of philanthropy that emphasizes family. And I emphasize family throughout the organization, that family comes first. And if they can take care of whatever's bothering them with their family, they need to take care of that first. And then having that empathy and that compassion to help them through whatever problems they have. And that seems to work, more so in the last 15 years in West Virginia than ever before.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And sometimes it is, especially for those of us who are very compassionate and very selfless people, sometimes it is like a little easier to think about it as like family care than it is to think about as self-care. So I love that you mentioned that. And I think that is so true. And just like emphasizing the family system and emphasizing like how important it is to be taking care of that like core before you can go out and take care of everyone else.
And, I just want to mention one more thing that Ron had touched on is oftentimes our families are really involved in our mission. Like, I mean, my family members are voluntold, I don't know how many times a year to, show up for this, show up for that. Hey, I'm going to be late. I'm doing this or that. So it's really important that we think of how our stress is impacting our family. And I love that your organization really puts family first. I try and do that for myself and, the people that we work with too. And I think, my executive director feels the same way. So we're fortunate to have that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks for adding that. I think that's so true because oftentimes we think about ourselves and we think about like how we can impact the community, and we don't think about how sometimes our over commitment or our over selflessness, honestly, like we're being a little bit too selfless and we don't think that it is impacting our family when it actually can be really greatly impacting our families. And something that is often helpful for people is thinking like, do I want my child, do I want my partner to be seeing my example, and then do I want them to like implement that in their own lives as they get older? Like, would I want my child to like run themselves ragged? Would I want them to like be losing sleep and not taking care of themselves? And so that's another way that we can think about like, not only is this for you, but it's also like setting an example and a precedent for the rest of your family. Okay, we'll move on to the next slide. Thank you guys so much for sharing. So we're going to talk more about self-care, and I'm just curious, what do you guys think of when you think of self-care? I would love for you to just like throw it in the chat, whether that is like your definition of self-care, an example of self-care, like what do you think of when you hear self-care? Okay, so we got self-preservation, taking vacation time, time for you, taking time for yourself, doing something important for me. Sleep, exercise, time with family, food and exercise, doing things that refresh you, keeping yourself healthy, making time for prevention appointments, exercise, etc. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So I am super impressed with you guys because nobody was like, lots of wine and chocolate, which like, I mean, can be a form of self-care, and everything is about balance, right? Let's see. Yes, Shoshana. Okay, amen to boundaries. Yes, absolutely. Boundaries. We're going to talk about that just briefly. I could do a whole thing just about boundaries, but so yeah, we'll go to the next slide. So like self-care, what it really is absolutely caring for my needs. You guys nailed it. So it's often like when we think of self-care, it is a very like pop culture word right now. And people are often like, think of self-indulgence, not necessarily self-care. And self-care is actually often like doing something that's difficult, that you need, even if you don't really feel like it. And so we try to implement all areas of the self. So the physical self, the social self and psychological, the emotional self, and the spiritual self. And so implementing things in all of those areas of our lives in order to help us care for ourselves. Self-indulgence is actually a behavior that seeks to numb, and it is actually part of the freeze response to stress. And so that's just a little bit of how self-indulgence is different than self-care. And again, like, I'm not saying don't indulge in chocolate, like don't indulge in wine. Wow, I'm having a hard time saying that word. Or like those things that you like, or like face masks or baths, or getting a massage, like all those things are wonderful. And just everything with balance, I think. And so we'll go to the next slide, because I want to talk a little bit more about some tangible examples of what self-care can look like. So it can look like going to bed early, eating a healthy meal, exercising, limiting substances, going to that doctor's appointment. I think somebody had said that in here. Talking to a friend, going to therapy, having a difficult conversation that you've been avoiding. Learning a new skill can be an example of self-care as well. Practicing some self-affirmations. That is a really tough one. I think often we are very hard on ourselves and we forget to like say nice things to ourselves. And actually, like our self-talk is a huge predictor of compassion fatigue and burnout as well, which we'll get into a little bit more here in a second. Also journaling, listening to music, dancing, attending a religious service, meditating, practicing breath work, prayer, getting out in nature, cleaning and organizing, and play, which like I'm so passionate about. And again, like I could do a whole thing just on like the need for adults to play, but I won't. So that is just something to think about, like, in what ways can I play? And play is really like when we get into that flow state, we forget, like we lose track of time. Anything that helps you do that is play. So that can be different for everyone. Does anyone else have any other examples of like seeing some of these things of like, maybe that is making you think of something else that you think of as self-care? Okay, that's fine. We'll just go to the next one. So a few more things that I just wanted to note. Participating in an activity that has tangible results to cultivate a feeling of achievement can be so helpful, especially with nonprofit workers. Like you don't get like this tangible product from the things that you're doing often. Or if you do, it's like years of work before you get that. And so participating in some things where you're like, I can do this activity and then I will have something to show for it afterwards, whether that's like a painting, whether that is gardening and like, oh, I got vegetables out of this, or I get to see like my beautiful flowers, and or like mowing the lawn even. Just some of those activities that like you can see the results of your work and feel a sense of achievement and fulfillment from that. That's something that we need as humans. So don't forget to do some of those things for yourself. Also, here's my little thing on boundaries. So setting boundaries is super important for not getting compassion fatigue or pulling out of compassion fatigue and burnout. And so that can look like protecting your leisure and alone time. So saying like, okay, I'm going to stay at the office till 5 or 6 or whatever time it is for you. And then practicing some rituals and routines for how you leave work at work. So one thing that a professor told me that really stuck with me was when they are like done with their counseling sessions for the day, they on their drive home, they would pass over a bridge and sort of visualize themselves like kind of casting everything into the water on their way home. Everything from their day, all their worries, all of their all of the things that were stressing them out, and just kind of like throwing them over the side of the bridge on their way home, so that when they got home, they could like fully be present there. And that's just like maybe something silly, but can be really powerful in visualizing something like that to kind of help you let go of your work day. And being present, being in the moment is a huge predictor of joy and of satisfaction. And so also recognizing what is within your control and what is not within your control. Again, this is like, that is pretty much what boundaries is like, what can I control? What do I not have control over? And how can I like help myself to let that go? And then my personal favorite, stop shoulding yourself. So this is like when we say those things in our brain, or sometimes even out loud, of like, I should have done a better job, or I should be working right now and I'm not, or I should, I don't know, you name it. I'm sure you're great at coming up with those, because we do this to ourselves all the time. Just try like to start catching yourself saying those shoulds. We say it so much more than we think. And it is a word that is used when we feel like shame. And shame is like one of the top predictors of compassion fatigue and burnout as well. And feeling like we're not doing a good enough job. And so how can you kind of like reframe that and maybe say some like positive affirmations towards yourself, like, I'm doing the best that I can. Like, we're all doing the best that we can. And some other things like that, that just maybe a helpful reframing to give yourself some grace in those moments. And then gratitude. Practicing gratitude is such a great way. And I think even Jeannie and Ron kind of like briefly mentioned this of just having that attitude shift of like, not just your why, but what are some things, like even just one thing that I'm grateful for right now, and kind of turning your mind in that way. So that being said, I would love everyone to just throw something in the chat that they're grateful for. That can be your cat, that can be the weather, it can be literally anything. It doesn't even have to do with work, but I think just practicing that. Sunshine.
Hey, Rachel,
Yes.
Let me just throw in one comment. One of the things that has really helped me over all these years is every day I look for an opportunity where I can make a difference in at least one person's life. And you got to look for it. You look for it when you go to the grocery store. I look for it when I walk across campus, and I look into the eyes of these students, and you got to look at them. And you'll be surprised how many times you can interact and make a difference. And I consider that part of my self-care. If I can make a difference in someone else's journey that day, and then I feel tremendous gratitude that I've helped make a difference.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. And that is actually a skill in the mental health world that we call contributing. And that is a skill that we use to help people kind of get out of some of those like negative spirals that we can go into, because the reality is when we help someone, even if it's like, oh, I bought somebody's Starbucks today, like that makes our day. Like it makes their day, but it also makes our own day. And so being able to do some of those things of just like, how can I impact someone today? That is totally self-care. I love that. Thank you for bringing that up. I'm just going to read some of these things that people said, and you can also read them as well, because I think that it can really help lift our days to read the things that people are grateful for. So, okay, so sunshine, fall weather, family, fall again, the bulldogs, of course, yes. Our colleagues. When we have good support systems and good colleagues, like it can make all the difference in our jobs. Leftover Halloween candy, I love it, especially on, what is it, National Candy Day, or boyfriends, dads, cats, husbands, family and friends, Yes, all of these things, nature, absolutely. So much like bulldog pride happening. Okay, that's awesome. Um, yeah, so I love it. I just wanted to do a little wellness practice there. So as we wrap up, we'll go on to sort of a summary of what we talked about today. And so compassion fatigue and burnout are just stress responses. And I just want to normalize that and say that like everyone experiences some of these symptoms, especially in the nonprofit field. Honestly, if you haven't experienced any of these symptoms, I would think that's like a little strange. And so don't be afraid of them, just be aware of them so that you can make sure you're taking care of yourself. And self-care, when combined with that awareness of our warning signs, can help us lower our stress and therefore prevent compassion fatigue and burnout, and even pull us out of it when we do experience those things. Yeah, so does anyone have any questions?
I don't have any questions other than asking if maybe you could do this again another time and like maybe dive a little deeper on some of these things.
Yeah, is there anything in particular that you would like more information on?
I felt like everyone was really about the boundaries and the
Okay.
bulldogs, but I guess you don't really talk about the bulldogs much. So boundaries.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I can't like for sure say that they'll have me back, but if they will, I would love to come back. So
I can for sure say that.
Anyone else have any questions, comments?
Rachel, I had a quick comment, and I think I need to just thank you for affirming some of the things that I've been feeling that are out there, and pay more attention to some of the things that you noted that I need to do for myself, because I really know I need that. And as a retired educator after 31 years, I joined a nonprofit. So basically, I went from one stress to a new stress.
Yeah.
And I love what I do, but I'm really glad to have that moment to just put some reality to what's happening. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I'm glad that you guys have even allowed this to affect you and to be part of your lives. And I do hope that all of you are able to kind of like take this and take care of yourselves, and be able to recognize some of those like warning signs. So I really appreciate that. And also like, thank you for all of the time that you spent teaching. I only lasted 1 year, so bless you.
It's like getting older. It's not for the faint of heart.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rachel. I mean, I think all the points that you brought up is just a affirmation of the things that we all need to do in order for us to continue to be effective.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
And then on the last slide, I just have a few resources for those of you who are curious to like look more into this. Burnout, The Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle is a book by Emily and Amelia Nagoski that has really great information on the stress cycle and how that can lead to burnout. And so that's a really great resource. And then Work Won't Love You Back is another book that could be a good resource for you guys. And again, like I'm a therapist, so I really believe in therapy. So if anyone feels that they would like to seek out a therapist, you can go to psychologytoday.com, type in your zip code and find a therapist near you. So yeah, I think that's all I have today, unless there's any other questions.
Rachel, thank you so much. I think we can all agree that in a profession that is all about building relationships and really trying to bring out the best in those, that we have to take care of ourselves. And this is just a really great reminder. So we appreciate you so much.
Thank
and
you.
Thank you to everyone for participating today.
Yes.
That's always helpful to, again, validate, like there are a lot of things that hit home with all of us, right? And it can be a little overwhelming to feel like it's just us. It's not just us. These are all normal things. So thank you. With that, we'll wrap things up for today. Don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn. There is that QR code there as well as the link. We got lots of free content out there. Hopefully you are engaging and utilizing that, and let us know if you have any questions, any follow-up on any of those posts and things going on as well.